Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hayes, and in today's video we're going to be doing a Frost DK PvP guide and updating our pre-patch PvP guide so you guys can go ahead and push up some of that sweet rating so you could buy some of that better deadly gear so you can do more damage and of course have more survivability. So let's go ahead and jump into this video and do this. So starting off, we've got to jump into the Frost DK PvP talents. So the first row, we're going to be speccing into 3 ranks of Icy Touch. Our Icy Touch deals additional 15% damage, and your Frost Fever reduces melee ranged attack speed by 6%. Secondly, we're going to be taking Runic Power Mastery so we can pool our Runic Power so we can dump Frost Strikes on the target when we're trying to like nuke or burst during a CC window. Toughness it's okay to increase survivability, but for the most part we're not going to be putting points into that because we want to reach other places that are in my opinion a bit more important. Now, as you can see in this next one, Icy Reach is something I felt like I could sacrifice a lot of the time, but when it came to actually arena gameplay, I found myself actually getting outranged by a lot of targets, and I could not have that. I needed to be able to either hit them with a Howling Blast to slow them, an Icy Touch, or a Chains of Ice so I can go ahead and close that gap. So that is something I sacrificed some other points for, and definitely went into that just for that specific reason. Now, the other thing we got to take obviously is Black Ice. 5 points into that. Frost Shadow damage, kind of a no-brainer, just increases your overall Frost Strike and Howling Blast damage. Next up, we've got Nerves of Cold Steel, which is fairly needed. Now, don't pay attention to what I have on my back right now. We will be dual-wielding with this spec, obviously. This increases your melee hit chance and increases the damage done by your offhand by 25%. Later on, we get a talent that makes our offhand basically guaranteed to deal damage with Frost Strikes, Blood Strikes, Plague Strikes. So it's definitely something you need to go into. As for the next row, we've got Icy Talons, 5 stacks into there. Makes the target we're hitting, reduces their attack speed, increases ours by 20%. Definitely something you need to do. Melee damage is one of our highest damage outputs, believe it or not. Outside of our major burst cooldowns, so you're definitely going to want to go into that. Definitely taking Lichborn. Getting out of Charms, Fears, and Sleep Effects is going to be definitely really strong, being that there's a lot of Warlocks out there that like the PvP, so definitely something you go into. Plus, there's survivability for the self-healing. Death Coiling into yourself is something I found myself doing a lot, because lately I've been playing a comp with a Prot Holy Paladin, which causes me to have to rely a bit on my self-survivability while also receiving off heals. So I do see myself using this quite a lot and spamming chains and kiting out and using Lichborn, LOSing, popping out from behind pillars and Lichborning myself from behind pillars. Seems to be a pretty regular occurrence if I get focused, which I don't really get focused all that often, but it does happen occasionally. As for the next row, we've got our Killing Machine procs. This is going to be an absolute need. You need to go into Killing Machine. You need the crits. You need the Frost crits. You need the Frost Strikes to deal your major burst pressure. So it's definitely something you go into. As for Annihilation, we don't go into Annihilation because, as we did in the pre-patch, we are not relying on Obliterates at all. And without this talent, you literally shouldn't use Obliterate because you're going to be eating your diseases off the target and losing your damage increases. So you really, if you're not spec'd into this, don't use Obliterate even if it's a Clothy. Honestly, it's just not worth it. But overall, it is a really good talent PvE, but for PvP, Obliterate really doesn't do that much damage. Being that you have to factor in armor, and there are a ton of plate wearers at the moment. Obviously, Frost DKs just came out. If a Frost DK goes into Frost Presence and you're trying to obliterate him, you literally are barely going to hit him for any damage. Or if you're like trying to damage a Holy Pally, which, you know, obviously there's going to be a lot of Holy Pallies, as it is one of the best healers in the game at the moment. It's going to be played quite a bit in arena, so you're going to see that quite often. It also meshes very well with other plate wearers, Holy Paladins do, so you can see how that kind of just correlates into not using Obliterate being the best path to do in PvP. Next up, we got Chill to the Grave. This is generating runic power for our Frost Strikes. You definitely want that for producing burst or producing runic power over time. Endless Winter just guarantees our Mind Freeze is usable at all times. It is an absolute pain to require runic power to use your Mind Freeze at a correct time because you need it during key times, and a correct kick can land you an insane kill or an insanely fast kill. For instance, if you kick a Holy Paladin right before you're aiming to kill him, it will make it so he can't bubble because it locks him out of Holy abilities. So really good to use this. Obviously, if you don't use that for PvP, you're definitely going to be gimping your overall mechanical strength. Next up, we got Glacial Rot. Diseased enemies take 20% more damage from your Icy Touch, Howling Blast, and Frost Strike, which, again, your two major damage sources is Howling Blast and Frost Strike, so you're going to be using that. Next up, Death Chill. Now, I have seen a lot of DKs not taking this, but for me personally, since I am playing a build orientated around CC window bursts, I am taking that for a little bit more control. I do like using it, and of course when it comes to battleground situations, I just absolutely love using that ability, full bursting and hitting a Howling Blast that just hits everything for like 6 to 7k. It's dreamy damage when it comes to Frost Decay damage. Also, double stacking like your Killing Machine effect and proccing Death Chill, they actually do stack. So your next 2 Frost Strikes will actually deal increased damage if you're trying to deal maximum pressure in a burst window. I have found that to be fairly strong, and it does add a little bit more control, especially if I want to go into weapon swapping later on when I have enough weapons. That is going to allow me to do like 2 Frost Strikes with 20% increased damage. So, I mean, potentially 8 to 9k Frost Strikes is going to be absolutely insane in the future, and I'm pretty excited to be doing that with this talent. So next up, Improved Icy Talents. You definitely want to take that for yourself, and of course if you're playing with any melee, it's going to increase their damage by quite a bit, as we talked about before. Melee damage is very big part of your pressure. Now, as for Merciless Combat, this was something I was kind of iffy about, like dropping off or putting back on, but overall I do think it's very good for increases your potential to kill a target below 35%, especially if you have the control with Death Chill and you know you're going to hit that guy really, really hard for an execute. It could be a way to push past somebody's cooldowns before they even know to press them. I have killed quite a few Holy Paladins before Bubble because I do have that control. So that is something I did find interesting about this talent. As for Chillblains, now this is something you can definitely play with or play without. It's completely up to you. I do like it because you can see as I Howling Blast this target over here, it applies a slow, I believe that can only be dispelled by like Freedom. And being that it's not a magical ability, they can't just get rid of it. You can see Chains of Ice here. Chains of Ice is actually dispellable because it is a magic slow. So if you're playing Holy Paladins and stuff, and they're popping off dispels like crazy, I mean, that guy is literally going to run away from you if you're being hit with a slow, and you don't have something that can dispel you. So I do really enjoy using that and having undispellable slow on the target. It allows me to reach them a lot because you don't really have a lot of damaging openers if you're playing double DPS on a Frost DK, and let's say you're killing a Paladin. You have to hard switch to the other target during the bubble and then switch back. You really need those slows to catch back up to the targets. Alright, next up we got Hungering Cold. Now this is a fairly good ability. I wouldn't even say fairly. It's one of the best CCs in the game as long as you don't break them out with your AoE pressure. So do be careful when you're using this ability not to AoE directly after and break them out, or like throw D&D on the ground or something like that. But it is a 10-second CC. 10 seconds. 10, not 6 seconds, not 5 seconds. It is a 10-second CC. So if you force the trinket and then you catch them in a Hungering Cold, and of course you catch the healer so the healer doesn't dispel them, it literally locks them out of combat for an extremely long time. If you're playing like TSG in 3s, or you're playing any kind of burst comp, that is a ton of time to land a kill inside of arena situations, like a ridiculous amount of time. You chain something like that with Hodge, that's like a 15-second lockout timer. That is actually crazy amount of time to CC and kill somebody. Do definitely use that. This can also thwart them killing you or killing your partners. Throwing that out there to be defensive and also catching their healer in it and just kind of kiting out their burst is really strong to do with this, especially if you force a trinket. So Improved Frost Presence is a way for you to increase your survivability by taking increased stamina, but I dropped that off to, of course, take things like Icy Reach and Chillblains. I've sacrificed. You can move some of these talents around, but preferably, because of the build I was playing, I did need to play quite a bit more aggressive, so I took those talents so I can, catch my target, kind of like I explained a little bit ago. As for the next talent row, we've got Unbreakable Armor, which obviously is your major burst cooldown. It's Pillar of Frost if you've played any of the current expansions. It's literally how you deal your damage, and of course it gives you a little bit of survivability, which armor, again, not going to be too massive, but if you're fighting warriors or Frosty Case that are actually trying to spam Obliterate, it will reduce their damage by quite a bit. Next up, we got Threat of Thessarian. Now, while dual wielding, your Death Strike, Obliterate, Plague Strikes also hit with your offhand. 100% of the damage if it's fully maxed out. Definite need if you're going to be dual wielding. It just makes your Frost Strikes and everything else hit really hard. Next up, we got Blood of the North, which increases Blood Strike, Frost Strike damage by 10%, which Frost Strike is your bread and butter when it comes to runic dumping on someone and dealing a lot of damage, so you're definitely going to want to be taking that. It also allows your Blood Strike to give you blood runes, which you can use for, let's say, one of the single runes on Howling Blast, throwing that in there to use on your Howling Blast and opening it up your damage for other buttons, which is really nice to do. And overall, definitely something worth specking into. Now, this is something I took points out of other things to spec into. Outgoing Pressure or Crit Talents is Acclamation. When you're hit by a spell, you have a 30% chance to boost your resistance to that type of magic for 18 seconds, and it stacks up to 3 times. This is actually, you wouldn't expect it, but this is an amazing defensive ability. Now, not only is it going to give you those resistances to those specific magic classes and make you a bit more resistance, because we get just pummeled by magical abilities right now, especially in battleground situations, and just the overall cleave of the damage you take is worth doing. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but I did hear that it also helps with paladins and a few other classes you wouldn't expect. So definitely go into this talent if you're feeling squishy and you need a little bit more defensive. This can help quite a bit. It allowed me to have more time to DPS on targets, more times to switch, more times to heal myself. Overall, it made playing the character a bit better when it came to defensive principles, which is normally not something I like to play to, but it's definitely worth it in this case. Next up, we got Frost Strike, which is your bread and butter in damage. You got to take that. If you're not taking that, your burst pressure is going to be definitely gimped. Now, we got Guile of Gorfine. Now, this increases your critical strike damage bonus of your Blood Strike. Not necessarily what we're getting it, but Frost Strike and Howling Blast. So those are going to be, again, your 2 burst components you're definitely going to be taking, and increase your duration of Icebound Fortitude, which is one of your major defensives, for another 6 seconds. So it becomes 18 seconds instead of 12, which is really strong. And, of course, it makes you immune to stun effects. So you use this against a rogue just after their opener, and, you can't be stunned. You know that kidney's coming. You know it's coming. It's coming. Throw up that Icebound Fortitude. Foils the whole plan. Next up, we got Tundra Stalker. This is just a damage increase for things that have been infected with Frost Fever. 15% more damage, which, why wouldn't you want 15% more damage? And, of course, this increases your expertise by 5, which makes it so targets that you're DPSing are going to have less dodge and less parry. Also, fairly good for overall damage. Next up, we got Howling Blast, which I'm going to be taking to, of course, deal a fairly good amount of frost damage, and of course apply my Frost Fever, which applies the slow, which is something I found to be very good to use, especially during my burst instead of using a Frost Strike. If the 2 targets are standing on top of each other and I hit them both for 6k, it's very hard for a lot of healers to heal through that, and they're not necessarily expecting that much cleaving burst damage to be coming out, and overall found it really good to use. Now, this was kind of where I had to sacrifice a lot of points. Now, I do like, in terms of raw pressure, specking down into like Dark Conviction, going a little deeper. I've tried out Rune Tap, Blood Tap builds. Spell Deflection might actually be pretty good, surprisingly, for Frost DK. I have kind of learned to like this talent as I've been playing Blood a bit. As you can see, this is actually my Blood armor. But I've taken Blood Barrier. Now, this is a damage reduction. Obviously, I'm not taking Subversion, and I'm not using Butchery to generate 1 runic power every 5 seconds, because I needed to sacrifice some of that offensive pressure I was generating for more defensive. Now, Blood Barrier, whenever you don't have runes up, it increases your damage taken by 5% for the next 10 seconds. Just increases your overall survivability, kind of like specking into that resistance talent. It's just going to make you take a lot less damage during the fight than you normally would. And it really just, it really makes you tanky. It was surprisingly how tanky it actually made me in Arena, specking into these things that I wasn't taking before. But overall, pretty good. Next up for the next line, I'm going to be taking Bladed Armor. And that's because you get, 5 attack power for every 180 armor. Definitely worth looking into and getting. It is a very solid damage increase. You wouldn't necessarily expect it to be. I actually did some tests where I tested out Ravenous Dead versus Bladed Armor, and Bladed Armor actually added quite a bit more damage. It does have extra levels, obviously, but overall did more, and I did like that. So next up, I didn't go into it. Now this is something I would like to spec into, but I did sacrifice a few things for the current comp I was playing. Increases your hit chance with spells, and that's literally the only reason I'd want to spec into this is spells have a higher hit chance to hit the target. Now that is something I do have quite a bit of hit. Wrong armor. Go ahead and go over there. I do have quite a bit of hit due to having a specific trinket that adds quite a bit of hit, and of course some of the Titan forged items. So hit isn't necessarily a problem for my character for the most part, and that's the reason I'm not using it. So next up, what should we talk about? Rotation, gear. We'll get into something. So when talking about gear, I'm going to kind of explain what you should go through and buy first if you haven't started gearing up, and of course evolve into over time and choosing different things. So first off, we've got the first thing you want to buy obviously is going to be your deadly off pieces. Now you won't be able to buy the belt or the boot. I believe one's like 1400 and the other one's like 1300. But starting out, try to buy all the deadly off pieces you can possible. Is going to be your biggest upgrade. So like your deadly ring, your deadly neck, your deadly cloak, your deadly bracers, those are all going to be the first things you want to invest into to increase your survivability, damage, and just overall your character. Next thing you can do is obviously make a Titan Steel Bone Crusher from blacksmithing. I think Titan Steel has came down insanely amount in the past week or two. I've had mine for quite a while, but it is an insanely strong mace to start out with if you don't have access to doing like Nax 25, where you can get one of those slow swords to drop off the trash mobs, or there's a few other swords you can get that'll be fairly good. But overall, the best weapons you'll be looking for your Frost Decay, whether it's PvE or PvP, is going to be the PvP axes, specifically for Orc. I believe there's other options for humans. But overall, the mace is a really strong melee item to go with. As you can see, it increases your attack power by 140. And in comparison to a, let's say, a heroic weapon, this only increases your attack power by 62. So it's literally over double the attack power because it's dropping off some of the expertise. Definitely worth getting this weapon if you don't have it for Frost Decay. But let's say you bought all your deadly. What do you buy next? The next thing, you could either go into your tier gear, which is going to be savage gear that you can buy for honor again, or you can go into buying your hateful off pieces, which I believe are like your secondary ring. Buy the hateful off piece to that. I think you can buy the boots and belt for hateful, and then the rest of the gear I believe you just buy for the most part savage gear. Now there is something you specifically want to keep in mind. You can buy two items, which are boots and helmet, which are hateful equivalent from the Wintergrasp for Wintergrasp marks, and they give you hit. Now hit is going to be somewhat important because you do want to hit a specific hit cap. Now for some reason in my mind 5% pops into my head every time I think about it, which I don't know if that's completely accurate or it's changed over time, but I remember back in the day it was 5% when it came to PvP. So the other thing you can get it from is obviously Sphere of the Red Dragon's Blood. Now this trinket is insane. It comes out of Heroic Nexus off of the last boss, and it gives 55 hit, which will obviously push you towards your hit cap, and of course increases your attack bar by 670. That is on use. It's on a 2-minute cooldown, so you'll be able to pop it with every other of your pillar slash unbreakable armor. And of course, whenever you have Death Chill, you have a little bit more control with that ability, and you'll be able to use that with your spheres, the Red Dragon's Blood, on the same cooldown to deal a massive amount of pressure. Definitely worth looking into. If you're not using this, you're probably going to be gimping a lot of your burst, and like if you're playing TSG or something along those lines, you're definitely going to notice a difference when using this trinket and not using this trinket. I'll go ahead and throw it up real quick. As you can see, it's worth 200 top end. Now, the other thing, this is extremely important, guys. Blizzard has went and added new relics for DKs and a few other classes in the game. Specifically for DKs, ours is really, really good, surprisingly. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the best trinket or best sigil for PvE and PvP, because The things that it's competing with is like there's a chance on hit that increases your crit by like 173. I believe I have that one somewhere in my bags. Believe it or not, I'll just pull it up. Sigil of Haunted Dreams, which your blood strike, heart strike have a chance to increase your critical strike for 10 seconds. It's a fairly good trinket, but overall, or not trinket, sigil, but overall this sigil is Plague Strike ability also increases your attack power by 106 for 6 seconds. It's not a chance to increase your attack power, it just does. So whenever you go ahead and, just Plague Strike a target, you're getting 106 attack power. 106 free attack power. That is like by far the most awesome sigil I've seen that they've added in. Not only is it going to work for Frost, but it should most likely work for the other specs too. And I wouldn't be surprised if in terms of damage, this became the go-to sigil for pretty much every class. Now, for some reason, I went to the Dalaran sewers, and I didn't find a blue version of it, so I actually had to buy it with a little bit of arena points, which definitely worth it. I think it requires 1200 rating to purchase this, so definitely look to get 1200 rating, because this is going to increase your damage. I think it's about like 25 to 30, which is actually fairly big considering we only got like 1,000. So definitely look into getting that. It will increase your overall damage. So in terms of weapons, you do want slow weapons. You don't want fast weapons. You do want to increase your overall top end as much as possible. As you can see, I've got like the Storm Strike mace. The axe will never drop out of Violet Hold. For some reason, that dog just refuses to drop. I don't know. But anyways, Storm Strike Mace is a good option. I believe that also drops out of Violet Hold. And of course, like I talked about a little bit earlier, Titan Steel Bone Crusher. But you're just looking for slow weapons to make your Frost Strikes hit as hard as possible, because you are going to be using like Unholy Presence to deal damage, and that increases your overall attack speed and global cooldowns by a lot. So it makes it very effective to go ahead and use slow weapons to deal the maximum amount of pressure with your Frost Strikes. And it's going to make you hit really, really hard and have a lot of burst pressure. So next up, we're going to be talking about enchants and gems. Now, in terms of gems, you're either going to want to be using strength gems, resilience gems, or spell penetration gems are all good options to put inside your gear. Now, obviously, one of the things you want to do is get the correct color of gems to activate your meta slot in your helmet. But in terms of enchants, you're going to want 50 attack power, 20 resilience on helmet, 40 attack power, 15 resilience on shoulders, which both are from Wintergrass, very easy to get. Your cloak enchant, do 23 haste rating. Haste is actually really solid when it comes to Frost DK DPS. And when it comes to your chest enchant, you're going to want 10 to all stats. Don't be stubborn like me and refuse to pay 1,200 gold for 2 extra stats on your chest. Don't pay attention to that. And then on your bracers, you have 50 attack power enchant to increase your overall DPS. For gloves, you're going to be putting, I believe it's called Crusher, on your gloves. That's going to give you 44 attack power. As for your pants, you want 75 attack power plus 22 critical strike rating. I believe there's also stam ones you can get for defensive, but overall I wanted this for more damage because 75 attack power is actually quite a bit. For your boot enchant, you do want the important part, which is the minor speed increase. It does also add 15 stamina, which isn't the important part, but obviously the minor speed increase is going to be. As for enchants on your weapon, obviously you want Razor Ice and Fallen Crusader. Now, if you are doing weapon swapping, obviously your other two weapons, you're going to be throwing Cinder Glacier on those, but we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in the future. I do need a few more weapons to actually do it correctly, but overall, it actually seems to still work. I'm very surprised that it works really well when done correctly, and does actually quite a bit of extra damage, but that's a totally different video or different subject that we can talk about in the future. So we've went over gear, we've went over talents, and we didn't talk about glyphs. Now, glyphs have been kind of a love-hate relationship. Obviously, since we don't rely on Obliterate, I didn't take the Obliterate glyph. Now, as for minor glyphs, we got Glyph of Pestilence, increases your pestilence by 5 yards. I would say that's somewhat important if you want to spread your dots, but overall for Frost Decay, not a massive thing. For Unholy, it's going to be a lot more. I do take Glyph of Death's Embrace. Your Death Coil refunds 20 runic power when used to heal, so you do get quite a bit more healing from your Death Coils. That is going to be key. And we've got Glyph of Raised Dead. This is something you want that doesn't require the regents. I mean, if you want to buy regents for the rest of your DK's life, go ahead and do that. But if you don't, just go ahead and throw this glyph in there. Then you're never going to have to worry about it when you have to sacrifice your ghoul for some self-healing, because there's nothing worse than finding out that you do not have a regent to summon your ghoul. That's just like, that is like, no, you just don't do that, guys. Just don't do it to yourself. Alright, so for your major glyphs, I've actually went into Glyph of Anti-Magic Shell, which increases the duration of your Anti-Magic Shell by 2 seconds. I have found this to be just amazing with either giving myself enough time to burst on a target without getting CC'd, or in terms of defensive. This Anti-Magic Shell lasting 2 more seconds has saved my life, or extended my life, more times than I can count. In terms of battle grounding, oh yeah, this is key, because every Frost DK knows that's watching this video. You have went into a fight where you've been cleaved by 3 elemental shamans and 2 boomies standing behind the line of scrimmage that just tore your face off, and you're standing there going, what? Yes, this is definitely the one I went with. I found it to be the best currently, but that might change in the future. Maybe the Icebound Fortitude one that gives you what, like 10% more defensive when Icebound Fortitude's up, could also be a solid option for survivability. But again, like I've said before, I have went into a little bit more survivability on my Frost DK than I was playing completely aggressive in the pre-patch, because in the pre-patch we had like what, 43% crit. It would almost be crazy for me not to want to go full aggressive with that. Next up, we got Glyph of Howling Blast. Now, this isn't necessarily a requirement, but I use it specifically because it applies the undispellable slow on my Howling Blast to stick on targets. And as I said before, that becomes real key if I'm playing a burst comp and I really only have specific windows to deal damage to something. And then, of course, most of the rest of the time is me trying to close the gap and get in position so I can get back on the target. Definitely going to be a big key. And of course, Glyph of Frost Strike, which reduces the cost of your Frost Strike by 8 runic power. Just increases the amount of burst pressure you can put out when you pull runic power. Grip someone in, hodge them, and completely runic dump on their face. Just increases your overall single target burst pressure. Definitely worth taking under that. So next up, we're going to be talking about rotation. So usually in Arena, my rotation can vary based on what I'm fighting. Like if I know I'm fighting a Frost DK or an Unholy DK, chances are I'm going to be changed at ranged, and I won't be able to yeet myself at the target and get in melee range very easily. I will have to like LOS, maybe play a pillar game a little bit to try and get in range and then grip something in. Potential. But overall, there's a little bit different ways I do this. Now, let's say I'm going to go aggressive on the target, and I'm just going to run in and deal pressure. The first thing I'm going to do is probably hit him with a very weak Howling Blast in the beginning just to apply the slow. And then, of course, go into a Plague Strike to generate that extra attack power, and, of course, apply my diseases. You need to apply your diseases, and you need to keep them up on the target. That's going to be what grants you a lot of damage and a lot of pressure. Now, also with this spec specifically, we're going to be generating as much runic power as possible to runic dump on the target when we do go to nuke or DPS the target. So let's go ahead and somewhat do that. We're going to be running in on the target. We're going to yeet ourselves through the air so we get almost pretty much an instant Plague Strike, and then we're going to go into our rotation. After the Plague Strikes, you're going to be hitting your Death Strikes, and then you're going to be dumping out some Frost Strikes. Now, this is not going for burst. This is just dealing like consistent damage there. I hope you guys like that little snow effect I have procking up. Now, in terms of Icy Touch, you don't necessarily ever have to use Icy Touch because you'll probably be using those runes when it comes to staying on the targets. But as you can see there is a little bits of downtime where you could use that Icy Touch for extra damage, or you can save the runes for the next Howling Blast, or you could put it in on chains. It's really up to you. But there is definitely a time there when you would use Icy Touch, like right there, that little bit of downtime. I'd definitely put that in if I was trying to deal extra damage, because that Icy Touch is going to deal a lot more damage than your Chains of Ice. Now, you don't want to be sitting there, in my opinion, and just saving it for a Howling Blast, especially if you're trying to deal maximum damage potential inside of a burst window. So as you can see, we're not touching Obliterate at all. Obliterate is just completely off the table when it comes to this build. Now, one of the other things that a lot of people didn't know is this build specifically, especially when you're using Icy Touch, generates more runic power than if you're using Obliterate, so you will be able to nuke quite a bit better and quite a bit harder than you would using Obliterate, which is completely unexpected. That is a mechanic I never really thought about or knew about back in the day, which is kind of funny. So obviously if you're going to burst on the target, you want to make sure you have Unholy Strength, so you can full burst with Fallen Crusader up. Now, obviously, when you're going to be bursting on the target, you want to generate as much runic power before doing so. The more runic power you have, the better off your burst is going to be, and the more pressure you're going to be dealing. The other thing you can do is actually make sure you time your burst around your Howling Blast, because that is going to be your second hardest hitting ability in the game. And of course, you want to make sure it stays up so you can keep your slows on the target. Now, because you're using that glyph, you don't actually have to use Icy Touch or Chains to reapply your stuff if the target's not getting away, or if you're you know, just relying heavily on that stuff. Now, next up, we're going to be bursting. We've got full runic power. You want to, let's say, burst on the healer, which a lot of the times you are playing Zug Zug Burst Comp's Explode Healer, which you're going to go ahead and grip the healer in. Most likely either hit the healer with a Strangulate, maybe catch a kick, but overall you're trying to stop him from casting during this time. Maybe a Hodge from your Paladin. And at that moment is when you're going to just go full madman. Now, of course, you want to try to have Unholy Strength up for it. And, of course, you want to have your increased attack power. So, keep those up. Keep your diseases up. The moment all that lines up, you're going to go ahead and hit your Death Chill and Unbreakable Armor if you're using Death Chill. And you're going to lay in some big Frost Strikes. Now remember, Frost Strikes are your main damage dealer with this. And you are just going to dump the living crap out of those. Now you do want to weave in a single Howling Blast, as it does quite a bit of damage. And of course, go about your rotation. Now one thing you do want to remember is every 6 seconds, your attack power is going to fall off from Plague Strikes. So you want to make sure you are weaving in some Plague Strikes there to keep up your attack power, and of course your diseases. Now you do not want downtime for the most part when you're nuking on a target with this build, and you want to try to keep up as much as possible. When do you want to pop Empowered Rune Weapon? And that's going to be obviously just after your burst, when you become Rune Starved and you cannot generate no runic power towards your damage. You're going to throw that back up and go back into your actual consistent rotation, being that you did just generate quite a bit more runic power. So that's kind of like your overall damage, your overall burst. Outside of your burst, you're just going to be DPSing on the target, putting in quite a bit of pressure, and trying to line up for a time that you can catch up to the target. Now keep in mind, if you can't catch your target, don't be back here unless you're trying to get a kill and be like spamming your death coils and not catching them. Now your main goal is to generate up your runic power at range, so the moment you close that gap, you apply your diseases and you just start frost dumping on the target for insane amounts of frost damage. That is your main goal. That is what you want to do. You want to ook zug zug that target into the ground as hard as you possibly can by doing that. So I believe we covered gear, we covered rotation, we covered quite a bit. Now you do want to make some focus macros obviously for your strangulate and your kick, because you want to be able to you know, kick and strangulate other targets without actually looking at them. That is usually where I have my focus macros. I was messing around with some other things, other weapon swapping macros, testing out the Cinder Glacier and whether or not weapon swapping Cinder Glacier actually still functions. And as far as I know, it does. So in the foreseeable future, I will be pushing a little bit harder into that weapon swapping, because I really do want to see my Frost Strikes hit for like 9-10k, which is going to be absolutely ridiculous to see. But overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this update. Let me know down in the comments below what builds you guys are using, as I am above currently 1400, and I'm going to be pushing my way up there to get the PvP weapons, because they're also one of the best for blood tanking for my PvE spec, as I have been playing blood, being one of the 2 tanks for my friend group to actually tank dungeons. Don't mind my actual blood spec. I'm not specing improved Icy Talons or anything like that, because I always have a Frosty K in my groups. I never pretty much not have another Frosty K in my group. But if you guys want like a blood tanking video or something like a PvE guide, you can see I got Champion of the Frozen Wastes. I've been full clearing dungeons, full clearing the raids. You let me know, and I'll make some content on it. So of course, until next time guys, this was your boy Hazed.